For a long time, bites from the venomous habu snake were a major issue in a few regions of Japan. The snake had a big impact on people's lives. For example, statistics show that in 1980, around 400 people were bitten, and some of them didn't survive. There are other venomous snakes in Japan as well. In fact, there are quite a lot, but the most harm comes from the biggest ones, the habu and their kin, the eastern pit vipers. They're all related to rattlesnakes and puff adders, and you could call coral snakes and cobras their cousins, just so you understand who the Japanese had to deal with, and quite often. All the bitten people were in serious danger because there were no antidotes for a long time. And when they did appear, you still had to get to the medicine. The antidote was made in liquid form, so it couldn't be stored in rural areas where there was no electricity or proper storage conditions, but it's those rural areas where the bites usually happen. Set up power lines there? Takes forever and costs a fortune. Come up with a new antidote? Same problem. And who knows if it's even possible. In the end, Japan came up with a solution that seemed like pure genius. Bring in an animal that eats snakes and is immune to their venom. And then, as usual, things didn't go according to plan, but we've got it all under control. So a cup of coffee, an unobtrusive reminder not to forget to hit that like button, and let's dive right into the story. You've probably already guessed what animal we're going to talk about. I even suspect it's on the thumbnail. So in 1979, about 30 small ruddy mongooses were brought into Amami Oshima Island to deal with local threats. There were several threats. Besides the habu snakes, the mongooses were also supposed to take care of the rats as a bonus. The natural habitat of these mongooses is Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Pakistan. And the wildlife of Japan wasn't prepared for such guests. The impact of the mongoose population became really obvious by 1993, and the Ministry of the Environment raised the alarm. You can get why the officials were concerned, as the mongoose population on the island was skyrocketing, hitting a peak of 10,000 by 2000. Did the snake population drop? Technically, yes, but mongooses weren't responsible for that at all. It turned out that the habu hunters had no interest in their venomous prey. Although at first glance, mongooses seemed like the perfect solution, the best option out of all of them. First, these animals are known for their agility and speed, which makes them formidable opponents for cobras. And cobras are cousins to the habu, so it should have worked. Second, mongooses have special acetylcholine receptors that make them less sensitive to cobra venom. This way, mongooses survive even bites that would be deadly for other animals. Third, evolution literally made sure that mongooses could kill snakes. It even showed them how. The critters use their quick reflexes and sharp teeth to deliver fatal bites. Overall, you couldn't find a better killer. But there's one but. Mongooses are active during the day. As for the habu, it's nocturnal, meaning the animals rarely cross paths. However, there's a second reason why mongooses were ineffective. Even if their timings lined up, it wouldn't have made any difference. The thing is, snakes are relatively tricky prey, and catching them takes some effort. And why bother trying when there's plenty of easier prey around, like mice and rabbits? It's like choosing between gourmet dining and fast food, but gourmet dining also tries to sink its teeth into you? In the end, the mongooses turned out to be completely useless for the job they were brought for, but they were very successful at breeding. And in 2000, the Japanese government started an active program to reduce their population. Since then, about 32,000 individuals have been captured. The last recorded mongoose capture happened in April 2018, and in the 6 years since, no new cases have been reported. Seems there's no one left to catch. And this led experts to decide that there are no more mongooses left on the island. Japan's Ministry of the Environment reported the successful eradication of the non-native mongoose population on Amami Oshima Island.
本当にありがとうございます。おめでとうございます。
Everyone was thrilled. Well, except for the mongooses, probably. But how did the Japanese manage to deal with the invasive species? It was actually a rather bumpy road to success. At first, people just set up traps along the roads, but this measure didn't really bring much result. The traps barely attracted the animals, and it became clear that only a more thorough approach would help deal with the mongooses. Eventually, they started using traps, toxic baits, and attractants, substances that lure animals to the smell. They also used different monitoring techniques, even brought in search dogs. All of this paid off. On this graph, the line represents the mongoose population and the bars show the number of traps set. But these are not the old ones anymore. The traps were specifically designed for mongooses. Due to their specific shape and size, other animals can't get trapped in these. Oh, and of course, civilians were involved as well. Since 2005, squads of mongoose hunters, consisting of locals and others, have been roaming through the forests and mountains to trap mongooses. Lots of money, effort, and man-hours were spent, all in an attempt to eradicate the population completely. Some viewers might be wondering, why bother with all this? Couldn't they have just left the mongooses alone? Sure, they weren't originally living on the island, but was it really necessary to spend so much effort getting rid of them? Well, yeah. The thing is, instead of controlling the snake population as expected, the mongooses started hunting endemic species on the island, including Amami rabbits and other local animals. It's worth mentioning that Amami Oshima is a subtropical island and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's home to many rare and vulnerable species. The main target of the mongooses has become none other than the Amami rabbit, which is now endangered. These rabbits are often referred to as living fossils because they are the last surviving remnants of an ancient species of Asian rabbits. Once upon a time, these rabbits inhabited the mainland, but now they can only be found on 2 tiny islands. However, because of the mongooses, the likelihood of encountering them has dropped sharply. Mongooses have also had a big impact on the populations of Ryukyu rats, which are now also at risk of extinction. In the end, about 15 endemic species were harmed because of the mongoose, which was actually introduced with good intentions. The farming sector was hit too. Mongooses, without bothering too much, preyed on farm birds and consumed fruits from the fields, and in their free time spread diseases to those they didn't eat. In just 20 years, the habitat of some small animals has shrunk by 40%. It became clear that the decision to bring mongooses to tiny Japanese islands was actually very destructive because islands are always unique ecosystems with local species that aren't used to living with predators and simply don't know how to protect themselves from them. Actually, the arrival of a new predator would cause damage anywhere on the planet, but it hits islands and everyone living on them especially hard. Especially if the predator is a mongoose, because mongooses like to eat and will eat just about anything they can easily catch. It took almost 25 years to rid the island of the invasive species and nearly half a century to wrap up the whole project. And although the extermination of a huge number of mongooses sounds kind of incredibly cruel from the perspective of preserving local species, Japan did everything very right. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you know how invasive species work. For those who've just joined us, let me explain. When invasive species appear in a new area, you can't let them spread and reproduce too much. If you miss the moment at the very beginning, it'll be much harder to get rid of them later. And in some cases, it might even be impossible. Since the Japanese can no longer find mongooses on the island, it means they managed to get rid of all of them in that tiny window called before it was too late. To put it in perspective, there are only 9 cases in the world where mongooses have been eradicated after being introduced. But our case is the only one in the world where a mongoose was successfully eradicated on such a large island as Amami Oshima. The reason's simple. The larger the area that needs to be cleared of an invasive species, the harder it is to do. By the way, snake bites have gradually stopped being a problem. By 2020, the number of bites had dropped to around 60 a year. But as I mentioned before, it's not thanks to the mongooses. People started taking various measures on their own, and the antidote became much more accessible, which prevented fatal cases. The black bars represent cases of bites where an antidote was administered. As you can see, the situation has drastically changed. Since 1992, there hasn't been a single recorded death from a habu bite. It's true that mongooses remain on other islands, so the fight against them isn't over yet. The experience gained on Amami Oshima is planned to be applied to other parts of Japan. For example, a team of specialists will soon be sent to the northern part of Okinawa. Invasive predators have also been spotted there, because there's a serious risk of the mongoose from Okinawa invading Amami Oshima again, and then they'll have to start all over again. Mongooses were brought to Okinawa during the Meiji era, so about 70 years earlier than on Amami Oshima. They released 17 animals at that time, but the conditions for the mongooses there are a lot more favorable. Okinawa has a higher temperature and is closer to the natural habitat of mongooses, so the birth rate and survival rate of invasive animals are higher here. For now, their population is controlled in the north. In the central and southern regions, mongooses will live as before. However, on Okinawa, there are fences. And thanks to them, the mongoose population decreases year by year. The fences, by the way, are not very tall, but they're made in an L shape at the bottom to stop mongooses from digging. And it seems to be quite effective, since mongooses don't usually climb over them. But there are also similarities with Amami Oshima. The survival of 3 endemic bird species on Okinawa depends on mongooses. If the story about bringing mongooses to a place to get rid of something sounds familiar, you're right. Japan isn't the first country to turn biological control. Yes, there's a term for when people use one species of animal to eradicate another. And there's even a whole field of science dedicated to it. Usually when people want to pull off something like this, they do research to identify the pest and its predator. Then they follow up with even more extensive research to understand if the predator or pest will impact everyone else in the region. And only then do they usually release the predator to work. And people have been doing this for a long time, in fact, quite successfully. The most famous example is farmers using predatory insects to protect fruit trees and gardens. But what about the mongooses? Small Asian mongoose was introduced to Cuba, Croatia, Jamaica, Haiti, Puerto Rico, the Lesser Antilles, Belize, Honduras, Panama, and a bunch of other countries, and usually everything went well. But then Hawaii decided to give mongooses a try. In the 1800s and up until the mid-1900s, the most valuable commodity in Hawaii was sugarcane. They actively grew it here, and one of the main problems the Hawaiian sugar plantations dealt with back then was rats. The rats chewed on the sugarcane stalks because of their sweet taste. Well, I guess you can understand them. The rat invasion destroyed a significant amount of the sugarcane, but they couldn't manage to fight them off. So in 1872, the planters came across an article about successes in battling rats achieved by sugar producers in the Caribbean. The scheme was pretty simple by today's standards. Sugarcane planters brought a mongoose from India to their fields, and it presumably ate the rats. Fewer rats meant less damage to the sugarcane, so the planters were happy and told the newspapers about their success. Why should we be any worse, thought the plantation owners in Hawaii. In the 1880s, 72 mongooses from Jamaica were brought to the Big Island and grown there. Their offspring were sent to plantations on other islands, first to Maui, then to Molokai, and finally to Oahu. To put it simply, even back then, not everyone on the Big Island was on board with the mongoose idea. They thought more research was needed on how the animals would fare in the Caribbean, and that the studies should be completed before bringing the animals to Hawaii. Unfortunately, no one listened to these skeptics, and soon something unexpected was revealed. Rats are nocturnal animals, which means they're active only at night. Mongooses are active only during the day. Sounds familiar? These two haven't even interacted with each other, and instead of clearing the cane fields of rats, mongooses started wiping out native species of animals and plants. Numerous bird and turtle species are in danger as their eggs are completely vulnerable to voracious predators. The situation was getting increasingly worse. In the end, special barriers were installed to prevent mongooses from entering nature reserves and protected areas. But it seems, unlike Japan, Hawaii missed the chance to act. Fighting the mongooses is already too late. Despite all the efforts of the officials, controlling the population of invasive predators today is so difficult that it's almost impossible. The mongoose is responsible for the death of at least 8 bird species native to Hawaii, birds that were included on the federal endangered species list. But actually, the Hawaii government doesn't call the import of mongooses biocontrol because the animals didn't go through a special assessment before being imported. And you could say that Hawaii got off pretty easy. After a British colonist brought mongooses to his Jamaican sugar plantation in 1872, there was a tick outbreak. The idea was that the mongooses would eat the rats. They didn't do that, but they spread all over Jamaica and drastically reduced the populations of local birds and reptiles. There was almost no one to eat insects and arthropods, hence the tick outbreak. The colonists complained a lot, but the British authorities claimed that the ticks were attacking the mongooses and that nature's balance would restore itself. Right. Sure. Out of lizards. On 4 small islands in the Caribbean Sea, St. Croix ground lizards rustle in the fallen leaves, fighting and foraging. But in a cruel twist, on the namesake island, these lizards were completely wiped out. They lost the battle against the voracious invasive small mongooses and land redevelopment. On 2 neighboring coastal islands, there were only 400 lizards left, which hadn't been eaten yet, Luckily, people raised the alarm, started moving the lizards to safe places, and increased the total population to nearly 3,000 individuals. Now scientists are working not only to save the lizards from extinction, but also to return them to the namesake island. A 4,000-year-old idea. In a recent study of tombs dating back 4,000 years in Egypt, a drawing was discovered showing a person leading an animal resembling a mongoose on a leash. This is the only image of its kind in Egyptian art. But just take a look. It clearly shows a collar and leash. It's known that mongooses have never been fully domesticated, meaning they haven't undergone controlled breeding, but some cultures did keep mongooses as pets. All for the same reason we've talked about so many times today, to control pets like snakes, rats, and mice. However, scientists suggest that the mongoose depicted in the tomb on a leash might have been used to scare off birds. This made hunting easier, though I'm not sure the second leash is attached to a dog. To me, it looks like some sort of goat without horns. Officer Mongoose. Like other countries, Sri Lanka uses dogs to sniff out illegal substances, but at some point a new idea came up. Mongooses. Locals have been using mongooses for generations to scare away cobras from their farms, so why not expand their job list? An application for a grant was submitted to the State Department requesting funding for a pilot project to train mongooses in detecting illegal substances, and the grant was awarded for a whopping $50,000. They also hired a specialist and convinced the National Zoo to let them use their grounds for training. The idea was to release a couple of mongooses into a cargo container filled with car parts. They'd rummage around in there, and if they found something undesirable, they'd come out with bristling tails. Do you think this is impossible? Turns out mongooses can be trained. They also passed the test successfully, and people were full of enthusiasm. But the project never got off the ground. Change in leadership, country upheavals, and everyone forgot about the mongooses. Too bad. They would have been cool cops. I'd even watch a sequel to Zootopia with them. You owe me a like. Go on. Don't be lazy. See you later.